Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's gathering for the Dig Ventures Archaeology Book Club. I'm Lisa, the founder and co-CEO of Dig Ventures, and very, very happy to be here. Before we get started, I'm just going to reiterate the housekeeping. You will have seen the chat already, which is that there will be a Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions in the chat. I can see already lots of chitter-chatter coming through, so please do keep the questions coming for Moudhy. Keep the chat friendly and constructive. We have a virtual bouncer with very big virtual muscles. And please be patient. If we have any tech hiccups, of course, we'll resolve them as fast as we can. And from what my team tells me, the world today is nothing but one big tech hiccup. So we'll do the best that we can. Anyway, I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Dr. Moudhy Al-Rashid. Moudhy is an honorary fellow at Wolfson College, University of Oxford. Her scholarship focuses on how people in ancient Mesopotamia understood the mind, the body, and the world around them, from medicine and emotion to myth and everyday life. Some of you might remember Moudhy from the last time she joined DV as one of our speakers for the first ever online Dignation conference way back during the lockdown years, which now seem like, completely other time. Totally. You may also know her from her fantastic presence on social media, which is where I first met her when she was absolutely crushing it with her cuneiform stories every day. And I can remember it was always a highlight to sign in every day and read whatever it was she had cooked up for us overnight. And some of the threads were, 10 to 15 posts long. And I remember, Moudhy, you were getting thousands of interactions, and I was so jealous. And I was like, how is she doing that? Anyway, it's really wonderful that you've captured some of those same stories and the objects of absolute delight and wonder in your new book, Between Two Rivers, Ancient Mesopotamia and the Birth of History, which explores Mesopotamia and cuneiform writing through the stories of real people and the objects they left behind. We're speaking today to celebrate the launch of the book in the United States. Woo! So everyone over there listening now, run out and get your copy. There's going to be a list at some point or a QR code during the event today of places where you can buy it. And apart from anything else, it's absolutely a gorgeous object in and of itself, and it will look very, very swish on your bookcase. So, Moudhy, welcome back. It's such a pleasure to have you with us again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for showing the gorgeous cover designed by Holly Ovenden, and I'm totally obsessed with it. It's just so pretty.
It is so, so pretty. And the table that I keep it on, you guys don't need to know this, but the table that I keep it on, always the sun hits it in the morning, and it's like, read me. So go out and get it. So we have so much to talk about for the book, but I thought one of the really great things you could share here, which is also in the book, is tell us all when the past kind of bonked you on the head and you realized that you were not actually going to go to law school, because there are so many people in the DV community, and myself included, who started their life on a different path. And then, they discovered the sort of interest and the wonder of the past, and it changed their lives. So let's hear your story too.
Yeah. So I actually sometimes like to compare it to leaving the man my parents chose for me for the man I fell in love with. Not that actually happened in real life, but it's a great analogy because I felt like I was supposed to go to law school. Everybody was expecting me to do this. I really did not do well on the LSAT, so I had to take it and retake it, and it was just like, why am I doing this? I don't even want to do this. And then one day, I had a layover, like a 1 week layover in London. It was supposed to be a day, and my brother and I, let's just stay for a week between America and Saudi Arabia, where we lived and are from. And I took a course on the book in the ancient world, and my brother partied for like a week, and as totally normal person might do in London for a week. And the first day was on clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia, and I would say that day really derailed my life in the best possible way. And actually, one of the tablets we looked at that day was the Babylonian map of the world, which I weirdly have like a fake copy of.
Oh, that's so cool.
So yeah, I mean, this object is just absolutely incredible, and it was my way into that world. It's kind of sort of beautifully symbolic that this incredible map that showed the known world and the unknown world, and how people made sense of the world around them, the creatures that inhabited it, real, imagined, real to them, imagined to us, was my way in, and I really wanted to share this thing that I love so much, not the map of the world, but the rest of cuneiform culture, with as many people as would listen, really.
Mm, mm. And so was it so I know that the Babylonian map of the world is what helped you fall in love with cuneiform. Was it that also the object that sort of shaped the book? I mean, what was the thing that first sparked you to write it? I think I remember the story that you were working on at the time, way back when on socials. But tell us, what tell us about that first blank page. What got you there?
Yeah, so it's less an actual thing than the absence of a thing that inspired me to write the book. I mean, there's so many objects that I thought deserved to be well known and deserved to have a book written about them. But it was more that whenever people asked me what I do and I said Assyriology, I would get these completely blank stares, like, huh? Like, is that a word that you just made up now to say something, but you don't actually have a job. And then I would sort of try to rephrase, like I study ancient Iraq and Syria, and people were generally like, well, what is there to study? Like Iraq and Syria just popped up in the last few decades somehow because all people knew about these places were about the conflicts that are
Mm.
either directly or indirectly caused by sort of imperial and capitalist interests. So it made me think, actually, this is our fault as scholars, as a field, that people don't know about the incredible deep sort of history about these places, about the milestones in human history that have grown out of the region between and around the Tigris and Euphrates, the birth of writing, some of the earliest evidence of wheels, although we're not too sure when wheels were invented, the earliest approximation of pi, the development of the zodiac that we still use today in astronomy and astrology. So it made me think, well, if no one's doing this, I guess I'll do it. Because I did already love sharing this stuff. As you mentioned on Twitter, I guess in a way this whole thing began as me sharing stuff there. And I created this, in retrospect, really cheesy hashtag, Mesopotamia Monday. I don't know why I did that. As if to,
Everyone was doing that stuff back then.
that's a good point. It sort of felt like if I could create a catchy hashtag, then it gave me an excuse to share this stuff. But people loved it so much and they were so interested. Then I thought, why am I just doing this on Mondays and confining it to this awkward hashtag? I may as well just share whatever I learned. So I started sharing whatever I came across while preparing lectures or language classes, researching a paper. And eventually that love of sharing, I think, planted a seed for a book. And here we are now with a book that I hope makes this world of ancient Mesopotamia as accessible as possible to anyone, like a tired stay-at-home parent or someone who drives a bus all day and their eyes are tired by the end of the day, an accountant who's been staring at numbers, just as I love learning about things that I don't have time for a deep dive on. Like right now I'm reading this gorgeous book by Harriet Ricks called The Genius of Trees, about the history and biology of trees, which I otherwise would never have time to sit down or headspace, sit down and learn about, like properly learn about. And I get to do it while I'm, walking a dog or cooking or whatever. And I wanted people to have that for ancient Mesopotamia.
Yeah, and I mean, my thought on that is, how did you know it was a book? How did you know that was what was needed rather than a series of research papers or like this sort of traditional academic routes? Because sitting down to write a book is a huge deal.
Yeah, it's definitely a labor. I call it a labor of love and hate because you really love what you're writing and you love the
Yeah.
process. But at some point, you hate rereading this thing to edit it. But that once it's out there in the world, you fall in love with the subject and with the process again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really. I wrote an article a couple of years ago around organized around this museum of Anigaldinana, which is so so in the city of Ur, which was on the banks of the Arabian or Persian Gulf in antiquity, which used to go a little bit further inland than it does today, there was a city called Ur, and it was a major city in ancient Mesopotamia's long history. And we have to remember that ancient Mesopotamia refers to a place, to a region, not to a civilization. And it was home to many civilizations and cultures that rose and fell in antiquity. So, for like the Sumerians, which I'm sure many people have heard of, from around 3000 BCE, the later Assyrians and Babylonians. So, there's already this very long history in the region by the time around 500 50 BCE, a princess is sort of installed in this office, this office of the high priestess to the moon god in Ur, by her father, who is then the king of the Babylonian king. And in this palace, excavators in the 1920s found objects from much earlier eras. So they found this really ornate title deed that looks a bit for like a land title deed that looks a bit like a tombstone you'd see in a cartoon from around the 1100s BCE. They found the fragment of a statue of a king who ruled around 2000 BC, a mace head that was probably much older, a clay cone that was a votive object dedicated by a king who lived around 1800 BC. So they found all these much older things. And they then found a cylindrical clay object that described another object in the room, a brick that excavators unfortunately never found. And it says that the brick was there anatamarti, which means in Akkadian for viewing or for display. There are other translations which I think are better, but just sticking with this museum story for a second, we'll go with that. And so the excavators who translated in that way thought this must be the earliest known museum label. So I wrote an article about this, and I felt like it was a great framework or a framing for a book, because I didn't want to write this tome, this chronological, sweeping chronology of all these vast empires. It just felt unmanageable, and also would have been quite dry, I think, to read a start to finish account. So I wanted to do a thematic history where each of these objects offer us a way in to some aspect of history in ancient Mesopotamia. The mace head, which is a very, very violent weapon, can tell us about warfare and violence and how people made sense of it and why they did it. The statue of the king can tell us a bit about leadership and the history of this idea of a king altogether. Where does this come from? How did people live before that? There were some school tablets also found that tells us about the history of education. So it felt like a natural way to organize the book once I came across it. And it was also interesting to complicate the idea, because I don't actually think now it was a museum, and I say that in the book. But
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's really interesting, because that whole, as someone who is an excavator myself, like that whole story of the mistakes that they were making or the assumptions that they were making during the excavation, and how that influenced what people understood about that whole scene there was also very interesting to read about. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet, Moudhy's approach is that she builds the chapters around specific objects, as she's just been sharing, rather than sort of just doing a straight timeline from the earliest to the latest, and I think that really allows you to tease out real biographies of these objects, and their places in society, as well as their actual intrinsic value as objects themselves. And that was a really, that's a total, like, set me off on the bibliography side hustle, that I had to go then read more about certain things. And as I said to you, when we were getting ready to have this conversation, never realized that I could care so much about bricks.
yeah. Me neither.
There it is. And I'm just wondering, I guess, of all the things that you wrote about, was there anything that surprised you, like any aspect of any of the stories about these objects that you discovered that surprised you?
I'd say, my editor, who was amazing at helping me bring out my voice, everything she read, she was just so struck by how present it all felt. And so for me, I think because I was already immersed in that world, and reading cuneiform for already 15 years, and familiar with such a breadth of sources, it sort of never occurred to me how modern these texts feel. So I think really the text, the cuneiform material, these clay tablets reference financial difficulties, fertility issues, the trials and tribulations of being a working mom who's trying to do it all, which is definitely not the same thing as having it all. People who are annoyed that they haven't been invited to a party. I mean, like, it's literally stuff that we still deal with. But I'd say, one of the most surprising things that I felt maybe influenced by the news itself and everything going on in the world was climate. Any archaeologist will know how, important predictable climate is to the success of a civilization. And it feels like that's something that we're really facing now. And interestingly, So Assyria, which is one of the empires that rose and fell in ancient Mesopotamia, with beginnings as early as 2000 BCE, but it rose to its height around 600 in the 600s BCE under King Ashurbanipal. So under Ashurbanipal, it was the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Cyprus to Iran and Egypt to Turkey. And it suffered this meteoric fall in 612 BCE that historians are still trying to piece together and figure out why. What happened? How did it have such a catastrophic decline? And it may be as simple as a drought, a drought that lasted way longer than people expected it to last. And all of a sudden, harvests began to fail. The price of grain shot up by 1,500 times. People were being sold into slavery for copper instead of gold, which is like quite a remarkable and devastating, thing to have to go through. Meanwhile, Ashurbanipal is boasting about how, everything is fine and the price of grain is this, and it's just completely detached from reality. So I think there are a lot of echoes between then and now with how we relate to the world around us and how much we need our land and our climate to be predictable. So I think for me that was one of the most surprising echoes of modernity in the past and of the past today.
It's interesting you should say that. I just read an article last week about, I believe it was in South America, the city, which also suffered quite a sudden decline. And the archaeologists there have actually found something that was written specifically to warn future inhabitants of that place of the potential for this catastrophic drought, which is what had driven the original population away. And they were saying, look, you can settle here, but just be advised that this could be, coming for you as well. And I thought that was interesting for exactly the same reason that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And the other thing that one of the things that surprised me is just how many languages are captured in cuneiform. Cuneiform itself is not a language, Cuneiform is many languages. And so I was curious to know how many of those languages you can read or speak or write or whatever. Probably all of them, but like
very few of them actually, but that's a really important point actually. So I throw the word cuneiform around without often explaining it, but cuneiform is a writing system, not a language, and it was used to record multiple languages in antiquity. I think 12 is the number of languages, and some of them are completely unrelated. The earliest that we can detect in the texts in the clay tablets is Sumerian, which is as far as we know not related to any known language, and then following that comes Akkadian, which is a Semitic language like Arabic, for example. So it was relatively, it's much easier to understand this language because we have some modern parallels and reference that we can use. But it then, got adapted to write Hittite, which is an Indo-European language. The only Hittite fact I know is the word for water is wata, which I think is so cool. And several other Indo-European languages like Hurrian, and then a few other Semitic languages like Ugaritic. And what I think is actually one of the most interesting things about cuneiform is that it is a very adaptable writing system. People used existing signs and sounds to expand what signs could stand for to be able to write more languages, to make it a flexible writing system. But the scribes, the Babylonian and Assyrian scribes working from around 2000 BCE onward, had the option to streamline this writing system and just create either an alphabet or a purely syllabic system. But they retained the Sumerian use of the writing system where signs can stand for entire words, and they kind of reveled in this extremely confusing writing system that seemed to be a core part of their understanding of the world around them as well. So kind of losing access to the different meanings that they created by making the writing flexible would have meant losing access to some element of reality. So it's a really interesting layered writing system where signs can stand for multiple things that could have been simplified, but the scribes were like, nope, we want to keep it complicated, as complicated as possible, which maybe sounds a bit familiar to anyone in academia.
Well, they're protecting their employment, right? So like if they make it too easy, then everyone's going to do it and nobody needs a scribe anymore. So there you go.
They're very early gatekeeping in a way.
Job protection behaviors.
Yeah.
So how many of these tablets do you think you've actually like this is an impossible question now that it's coming out of my mouth, but like, you've worked on literally thousands of tablets, haven't you?
Yeah.
And they could be size of an iPad, kind of down to your palm. Like, what's the range really? Are they heavy? What does it feel like to hold one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've not worked with actual tablets that much. I've probably handled maybe 50 or 100, something like that. Mostly in teaching context, because we're very lucky here to have the Ashmolean Museum, which is a teaching museum where you can take students in, and you have a tray of tablets from all eras, and you can go through the different features of them and hold them, measure them. They learn how to draw them as well. But yeah, I mean, the ones that I tend to work with would be they'd fit in the palm of your hand, like an iPhone, maybe a little bit bigger sometimes. Um, but there are tiny ones, like the size of the tip of my thumb, and there are huge ones, the size of an iPad or even bigger, like an account for a whole year or something like that from 2000 BCE would be humongous. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's very hard to read a tablet because cuneiform is multivalent, because science can stand for multiple things, and because they're 3D objects. So if you're handling one, I mean, you can sort of see with here, it's different if it's a little dark from this position or that position. You need to kind of move it around a little bit. And there's some really incredible scanning technology that makes it possible to access these tablets and even sometimes change the shadow on them. That's being done by the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, the CDLI. And they do amazing work to try to make it accessible to anyone who wants to work on a tablet anywhere. So you don't have to get on a plane and get a visa and get funding, and you can just go online, look it up, and that's primarily what I'm so grateful I get to do.
Yeah. And so is the majority of these texts, do you think, administrative? Because or is it storytelling? So in the book you talk about, of course, cuneiform started, it was something to do with beer, I think I remember was the reason why, counting beer or something.
Mhm.
Which as archaeologists, that's a classic ingredient of archaeological culture. So not surprising. But then of course it moves into just recording their lives and the things that are happening around them. So what proportion of the tablets do you think are administrative versus what are for storytelling, artistic purposes?
That's a good question. I don't really know how to answer it. I would say a really big chunk are administrative, because that's what they
Yeah.
needed to write down. They needed to make records of transactions and loans and make sure people were paying whoever needed to be paid for whatever goods or services that that they needed or that they had access to. And there are some periods, such as the Third Dynasty of Ur, which is 2100 to 2000 BCE, where there are tens of thousands of administrative texts, and it's sort of like almost a joke in the field that if you run out of stuff to do, there's always a receipt from the Ur III period that there needs translating. And that sounds really boring, but it actually isn't. And I really kind of come full circle on this, because I used to have to translate Ur III tablets as part of my learning, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I don't care how much, how many onions this dude bought 4,000 years ago. But actually, it's really cool that this person who's otherwise forgotten for thousands of years has
Yeah.
resurfaced, because they purchased onions from someone, 4,000 years ago. And I just think that's something really moving and human about that recovery of a story. So in a way, every object is telling a story. But if we're looking at the kind of the range of what these tablets can be about, I mean, there's everything from the standard administrative text, legal cases, including some really dramatic ones where someone is fighting for, there's a woman in the Neo-Babylonian period, so she would have been contemporary with Enigaldinana, fighting for her children after she herself was freed from her enslaved status, fighting for her children to also be freed from that status. Her name was La Tubashini. There are incredible letters. I mean, some of them are work related, like a work related email, but some of them are devastating, talking about loss or talking about how, a woman writing to her husband, a woman in Ashur writing to her husband who's 5 weeks away on a donkey, saying, I'm tired, please come home. Like, I can't do all this stuff by myself. There are beautiful works of literature, like the very famous Epic of Gilgamesh, but there are many others, like The Descent of Ishtar, that tells of the goddess Ishtar's trip down to the underworld, and what happens there. And it's quite a fun plot twist at the end that gets her out. And there are school tablets of kids learning, a single wedge over and over and over again. That's just
I
so
love this so much. I love it so much.
yeah. And this text has just come up here about Shinunutum, a woman, a young girl who was blind and was moved from some city, I'm not sure where, to the city of Kish to learn music. And there's a big, strong connection between blindness and music in ancient Mesopotamia. But there are also lullabies, to quiet a crying baby, and recipes for soup and bread and beer. There's literally there's so much. And then the stuff I work on, which is the history of science. So medical texts talking about,
Mm.
people feeling anxious or depressed, but also suffering from like urinary tract infections, or a baby who's teething. I mean, a huge range of medical issues. And then people observing the skies and making sense of planetary motion and creating mathematical astronomy over the course of generations. It's just mind-blowing how many. I could go on forever. I'll shut up now, but
I was about to say that I feel like there are so many books that are about to happen that are coming out of the things you're talking about. It must have been impossible to like narrow down to the ones that you would actually be able to hang the book off of this time around, with so many, but so many great like themes to choose from. And I definitely want to get into some of the stuff that your specialty around medicine and the mind, the mental health, and how that was written about and kind of immortalized. But I also have one question for you, which is very much from like I've experienced this kind of thing myself as someone who works a lot with the past, but a lot of these tablets are broken, right? So you're reading the stories and you're experiencing this moment of onions or whatever, and then the rest of the recipe is gone, right? It's so frustrating because you never get to finish the thought. But if you could time travel basically and go back and fix one of these broken tablets so that it was actually complete, what's the one that keeps you up at night? Which one would you fix?
That is such a good question. I think I'm going to be a bit, boring in my answer and say, if I would love to have a complete Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'm going to give a bit of context for that, because I did not like the Epic of Gilgamesh for a very long time. That's partly because I had to learn it in Akkadian. And when you have to learn something in your 20s, you just don't like it. It's just sort of a requirement of life. And I also wasn't that interested in literature at the time. I was more interested in the scientific texts and what people were doing in the astronomy and medicine, and linking between the two and the much later periods. And so having to slog through, tablets 1 and 6 and 11 and blah, blah, blah of the Epic of Gilgamesh just felt like such a chore. But I've reread it many times since. And this is a work of literature that tackles so many themes that are ones we all deal with. It's about love. It's a queer love story. It's a love story. It's a story about love between families, and what people fighting for their families in the beginning against this tyrannical king. It's a story about, going on adventures together, but also a story about loss. It's a story about making sense of the world beyond the known world. And it's a sci-fi adventure. It's a story about wisdom. And it's also a story about why we need history, because he seeks out the wisdom of the oldest man in the world, Utanapishti, who survived the great flood that was sent down to destroy humanity and didn't. And so it's a story really about what is important in life. And it's at the end we get the answer to that, which is just to live, and to make sure that the collective survives, and not just you as an individual are not prioritized over the survival of your community, and working together to make life easier for each other, because it's brief and we don't have that much time here, and we may as well make the most of it. So I think it's a really beautiful, important tale, and I would love for all the broken bits to not be broken.
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, I don't think that's a boring choice at all. I mean, just think about how much more richly we'd be able to experience that if we had like the complete, story really. Um, so coming back to your specialism around medicine and the mind and scientific, astronomy texts and whatever, and how that was written about back in the day, I wondered if you could share with us someone from then that you come across in your research whose story feels kind of instantly relatable. I mean, some of the stuff you've written about is just, and now I'm like, wait a minute, was that from her threads or was that from the book? Like everything is all mushed up in my mind, but you write about so many incredible people and everyday things that happen. I just wondered if there's something relatable you could share with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, there's not a ton of convergence between my research on medical texts and what I write about in the book. And that was sort of on purpose because I thought if I write about medical texts, it's going to be a boring book because the only way I know how to write about these things is in a really technical way. But I would say a couple of months ago, my husband was away for work, leaving me alone with two very small kids, toddlers, and two, at the time, we now have three, but two very large dogs. And within a few days of his departure, my 2-year-old developed this really high fever that was sort of like, do I go to A&E? Do I not go to A&E? Thankfully, my best friend, Jen, is a GP based in California. So it was, 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning, and I could call her and be like, what do I do? But, and at the same time, a very elderly lab had developed a tummy something. Probably he ate something that he wasn't supposed to. So I had this sick, almost baby, this sick dog, ancient dog almost. And I spent a really long night, just cradling my child downstairs, letting the dog out every, 20 minutes or so to do his thing in the garden, checking temperatures, cooling off, giving Calpol, hoping desperately that no one in the house would need anything for a few hours. And I felt incredibly tired and alone. I was anxious about my child, obviously, less so about the dog because he's, always eating something he's not supposed to eat, but worried about missing work the following day because I'm sole breadwinner, and just trying to look after everyone while sleep deprived as well. And it just made me sort of rewind 4,000 years ago, where we meet a woman called Lamasi, who lived in the beating heart of the Assyrian Empire, the city of Ashur, in northern Mesopotamia, in the capital. And she had not two, but 7 children, a textile business where she would make, source the wool, spin the wool, make the textiles, a 6-month process to make one of these things, and a husband who was a month away on a donkey, not 4 hours away in Devon or wherever my husband was, trying to sell her textiles, trying to sell the products she was making by hand. And letters from her to her husband preserve her frustrations and anxieties. She's struggling to make the textiles. He's not selling them for enough money to cover the bills. She's also making clothes for her kids. It's not, she can go to Primark and just buy stuff. She's also feeding the family, making stuff from scratch, and dealing with what sounds like a really irritating neighbor. So I think there's a lot of humanity in moments like that. And for me, that was instantly relatable because of where I am in my life right now. But even if someone is not a mom, even if someone is not a parent, even if someone maybe, doesn't care about someone buying onions 4,000 years ago, I think it's really hard not to find a relatable moment in this material. There's so much love, there's loss, there's humor. There are letters of people trying to organize a night out between cities, medical texts about hangovers, and it's just people being left on red, like someone saying, a letter that says, good behavior this is that you don't respond to me after I send you letter
Yeah.
after letter, sass and sarcasm. So it feels present. And I think, for me, that was the moment that really resonated just because of where I am in my life. But I think for everyone,
Yeah.
there's a tablet for you out there. No matter what
Yeah.
you're going through, you'll find someone who was going through it back then as
Yeah,
well.
that's very true. And so many of the stories in the book are so relatable. It's kind of when you finish it and look up from the page,
Mhm.
um, it's easy to feel like no time has passed between their experience, no matter how different the world was then, and our experience now, because it's kind of the same core things we're all dealing with, you know?
So true.
Yeah. So I was threatening before we came live to read you a little passage from the book and just ask you to expand a little bit more about it. So I think we might have enough time to do that. So I'm just going to read and ask you to reflect, if that's okay,
Go
what
for
you were
it.
thinking when you wrote this. But you wrote, and this is on page 45 for those of you who might have your volumes handy at the bottom. Together, seals and early writing provided the much needed bureaucratic tech to meet the growing demands of agricultural production and distribution in the last half of the fourth millennium BCE in the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia. The same circumstances that made the soil fertile enough for agriculture to thrive also left behind the clay that became the medium for recording the fruit of that soil. I find this really moving, that the landscape itself made this leap in human innovation possible, that ingenuity worked in tandem with geology to change the course of history. So I was incredibly struck by that, stars all over it. So I was wondering if you could, bring us back to when you were writing about that, and what made you feel or think that way about it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's on so many levels, on a symbolic level, on a very concrete level. It's a really moving connection between what the land is made of and what people made with the land. I mean, it's sort of an obvious connection, but it's not something that is
Yeah,
often made enough of a big deal out of, I think.
yeah,
And I think it really speaks to people's connection with their landscape. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay is really, in many ways, the backbone of how people understood where they came from. I mean, creation myths say that humanity was made out of clay. Enkidu, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, if I'm remembering correctly, who becomes Gilgamesh's companion and lover, he is made from clay mixed with the blood of a particular deity. So I think clay is a really, foundational thing in ancient Mesopotamia. And I think that connection that people have to their land and the way that they use it to create these innovations and these leaps in human history, but also the way that they, understand it symbolically and fit it into their mythologies and their understanding of themselves and where they came from, and also where they return to, because when someone dies, they return to clay, is the expression used. Uh, I think it's just really beautiful. Just a beautiful expression of that connection.
yeah. It made me stop and think for a second. If anything had been different environmentally, if the soils and the water and the nutrients hadn't combined to make a certain kind of reed grow that had the potential to be used to mark the tablets, then none of this might have happened, and things would have progressed in an utterly different way. It was definitely one of those sliding doors moments that I hadn't ever really considered, and I loved that you had teased that out and shared that was something that you had found so remarkable. Actually, the book is full of stuff like that, and I think that comes from your perspective, and shows just how much you love the fullness of the society that created the tablets and everything. So we're coming up a little bit on time, I think, and I want to leave some space for questions. So I suppose, as a last question from me, for readers who are keen to learn more, what would be the very next sort of object, site, author, or resource that you might point them to?
I'll say two. One is the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, which then each page, it's a database of tablets, and each tablet links you to other resources in the field that are all free and available to use. It's cdli.earth is the website, and it's also just fun to look at pictures of tablets. I mean, maybe that's not normal, but that's how I feel. And there's an amazing book called Assyria: Rise and Fall of an Empire by Eckhart Fromm that I really, really loved. I learned a lot from it. It was really well accessibly written, and it was full of moments in people's lives that I was totally not expecting, and I think people would really enjoy that way into the history as well. And it has a nice focus on Assyria, which I think is very important too.
Oh, super. And for anybody who was listening and didn't catch those resources, they'll definitely be in our show notes in the email that we send out after the broadcast today. So thanks so much for those recommendations, Moudhy. I'm sure everyone will take advantage. I'm gonna now swing into start picking through some of the questions. And the first one that I can see is from Jane, and she says, "How long did it take you to write Between Two Rivers?"
Ooh, so this is a good question. I wrote it at like the absolute worst time in anyone's life to write a book, which is that I had a toddler at home during a pandemic. I was pregnant. I have a heart condition, so pregnancies were not straightforward for me. And then I edited it. So I was like, I have a due date, so I have to turn this in before the due date. So I wrote it in about a year and a half, but it took me another year or so to edit it because I had a newborn, and that everything is just slower when you're sleep
Yeah.
so I would say all in about 2.5 years. But there were a lot of editing rounds, and there were a lot of, inconsistencies and little errors. Like I have this gift for mixing measurement systems. In a single sentence, it would be something as kilometers away and pounds as well. I just can't decide what to do. But it was I was really glad to write it at that time in my life because I think it made me a lot more empathetic toward the sources because I sort of instantly I was quite emotional the whole time, but I was also instantly, responsible for another human life, and that forces you to look at the world from that person's perspective in a way that
Mm.
it's not a prerequisite to that level of deep empathy, but made it easy for me, I think, to be more empathetic to the sources.
Well, I mean, hopefully we won't be dealing with any more, lockdowns in the future. So you might have an easier time through with your next book, which I think we're all assuming there will be. So
Yeah, so
wonderful. The next question comes from Simon, who wants to know who was writing on these tablets. Was it mainly a specific scribe class, or was there a level of general literacy in the population? And this has partially been answered in the chat, but I'd love to hear your perspective, especially on that last point around whether or not there was literacy at all in the general population.
That's a great question. It varies from period to period and place to place. But in general, there was a kind of class of, I don't know, class is not quite the right word, but there was a subset of the population who took on the responsibilities of being a scribe, and then in some cases moving on also to be a scholar, sort of adjacent to scribalship with scholarship, where you'd specialize. For example, with the medical context, which is what I'm most familiar with, someone would train to be a scribe. They train their sort of basic and then advanced literacy, including learning, Sumerian works of Sumerian literature and math. But then they'd go on to learn about animal health. They'd go on to sort of vet school in a way, and then from there they'd go on to learn about human medicine. So there were stages and apprenticeships in different fields, and that was the same for astronomy, for people who specialized in taking different kinds of omens. But then there's also those people who just needed a scribe for day-to-day things. And in some periods, business people, merchants mastered a basic repertoire of signs to be able to send their own letters, to make their own records, to save money, I suppose. I mean, it doesn't say that anywhere, but I would imagine that it just makes it easier and cheaper to be able to do it yourself. So that, for example, was a little bit more widespread. That level of basic literacy was a bit more widespread during the old Assyrian period, around 2000 to 1600 BCE, when there is this vast trade network that springs up with Ashur at the center in a way, and then Kanish, well, I guess two centers, Kanish in what is now Turkey and Ashur in the heartland of Assyria. So it's a great question. It varied from time period to time period, but primarily it was restricted to certain people.
And both men and women have access to literacy and writing and things. Is there anything in the records about that?
Yeah, I mean, the record is skewed in favor of boys and men learning how to write, which doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't sort of like a relatively equal amount of women and girls learning. We just haven't recovered it, or maybe that was the case. But there were definitely girls who went to school. There are school tablets with lists of words, which is one of the stages in the curriculum, and it's signed. There's one that's signed by I'm forgetting her name, in the city of Sippar, and she signs it as a scribe with the feminine marker in the word, so we know that she she was a girl, and probably a girl, not a woman, because of the stage of the curriculum and the ages we think people were when they studied these things. And there were women who worked as scribes. There's another example from Sippar of a woman who worked as a scribe for 30 years, I think it was. So it was a huge career. Again, I'm forgetting her name, but yeah, some really remarkable women writers. And then the first named author in history is also a woman named Encheduanna, who also held the role of high priestess to the moon god in Ur, just like Enigaldinana. And she lived around 2300 BCE. So lots of great examples of women writers from ancient Mesopotamia.
Yeah, and there's a bit in the book actually about Enheduanna. Did I say that correctly? There's a bit in the book about her and what her life was like and what brought her to the position that she had as well.
Yeah.
So there's another question. This one from one of my team members at Dig Ventures, which doesn't surprise me at all. But from an archaeological perspective, are tablets still being found? Are they relatively rare?
Yeah, they're still being found. There are quite a few active digs I know of in Iraq. There's, I think, Nippur just had a field season earlier this year before it got too hot. I'm pretty sure they're back in Ur as well, and various other sites. And wherever there's a dig, pretty much you find tablets in various stages of disrepair or perfect preservation, really depending on the site. And so I wouldn't say they're rare, and there are also quite a lot of undisturbed tells or mounds in the landscape of Iraq and Syria that one can only imagine how many tablets are buried under those places and what those places might have been called and whether they're referenced in other texts. And there's still quite a lot to rediscover and unearth.
That would absolutely keep me up at night if I was you. Wondering, I'd want to get straight out there.
Yeah, I'm already up all night, every night anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, for a final question, I wondered if there's any stories or particular objects. Let's say you said there was many rounds of editing and many sort of things that you had to change, but is there any stories or objects that you would have liked to have included in the book that went to the cutting room floor that you'd like to share with us now?
I don't think so, actually. I had such an incredible, editor helping me with this, and she made sure that I got to keep the stories. And there was one who almost got cut out, and I was like, no. Who I mentioned earlier, La Tubashini, the woman in I think Babylon, who she was sold into slavery by marriage as probably a child, and then went on to have 6 children and was freed from her slave status and fought for the freedom of her kids. And I just found that story so moving. And one round of editing got that cut out, and I just undid. I just did undo and put it back in, because I just thought that story was so. It would be like taking on, a mega corporation today to fight for what you thought, was the right thing. And I think we need more of that, more of those stories.
Again, another one of those really lovely connections to ponder, like when people are searching for motivation, maybe to stand up for something at this time that they believe in or whatever, that to know that people have been living that way for just as long as there's been humans,
Yeah, there's always been courage. So.
Always been courage. I think that's a really lovely thought to sort of close the conversation on. There's always been courage. There will always be courage.
Yes.
So wonderful. I'm sure that there will be more questions that we'll take from people as they come across on YouTube, but I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there. Okay. So I just wanted to say, Moudhy, such a huge thank you for making time to be with us today. This book has been such a wonderful companion, and I'm so happy that all the folks in the US can get their hands on it now. And it wouldn't be right to not say, can we expect another book from you anytime soon? If so, maybe when?
I hope so. I'm working on a book proposal. It's a lot grittier than this book, and I think it tackles some of the things that I got to do in my day-to-day research. So it's a little bit more about how we make sense of the world and life when it gets really hard. So that's
Oh, I love
stay
that.
tuned. No, no, it hasn't been shopped around yet, so we'll see if it ends
Okay.
up being a
Well,
book.
that sounds incredible, and I'm sure that everyone listening today is like, "Yes, get started." So, we'll all have that to look forward to. And for those of you who are listening, just a little note that our new dig season is now open. Just launched the calendar preview. And whether you've dug with us before or you're brand new to DV, we are very excited about this coming season. We have 7 incredible sites, many new ones that some of you who've been with us for a while won't have heard of before, from Neolithic monuments in Ireland to a Tudor palace, actually, in Bedfordshire. So you can join our team and help us make real discoveries in the field. Or you can be part of our finance room if you don't want to get dirty in the trenches. So there's something for everybody. Take a look at the previews and join us when the campaign's open on 1st of December. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks so much again, Moudhy, and see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks everyone for the great questions and for being here.